Sounds like a gimmick.
Thank you all for coming out on this chilly winter morning. We'll just open up audit and risk and call for any apologies. There appears to be none. Conflicts of interest? None at all there. Just before we move on to the confirmation of minutes, I would just like to call on a mover and a seconder to accept the supplementary agenda. Do we have a seconder? So Deputy Mayor and Councillor Williams. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay, those against? Carried. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting on the 11th of March.
I'm happy to move, Mr. Chair, just have correction.
Yeah.
Just page 2 of 13 or number 8 in diligent. It's not Joseph Cullen, it's Joseph Allen.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Fulton? Are we happy with those amendments? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. All right, thank you very much. Any matters arising from the minutes? Oh.
Just one matter, Mr. Chair. Paragraph 5.2 regarding the trust, it said the council needed to be advised why it was not being provided. That was the Ngaitahu contribution. Has there been an update on that?
Yes, there'll be something that will be brought to council next week, the 17th. So we're pulling together a paper to report back on that.
Thank you.
And Councillor Ward?
No, I'm all good. I think I'm having some finger problems, so I'll turn that off now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right, so we'll move straight on to presentations. And we'd like to welcome Miles O'Connor. Morning.
Morning. Yeah, do I just press? Yeah.
This one. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to present again. There's two parts to the presentation this morning. This first is the dashboard, which is the report, basically the report and policy compliance and what your position is. Do you want me to go through that or just highlight the main parts of it?
I'm perfectly content with highlights, but if anyone else would like the full report, highlights would be fine. Thank you.
There's the economic. That's me driving it here, is it? So, the economic commentary, well, obviously, a lot is happening, and it's a fairly what we call dynamic market at the moment. So, gosh, I mean, I could spend the rest of the day talking about this, but for the sake of sort of brevity, we're getting volatility in the markets at the moment that is almost unprecedented. On the Liberation Day tariffs on April the 2nd, the US 10-year Treasury bond yield in the space of a day and a half went from 3.88% to 4.5%. It has every day it has a morning and an afternoon session, and but one of the afternoon session after the tariffs were announced was the biggest movement. It's the biggest movement in one session in 38 years. Those sort of moves are unprecedented. But after it went up from 388 to 450, because the US 10-year Treasury bond yield is a benchmark for global interest rates, and then went down to 4.14%, and now it's back up at about 4.5%. So when it's going, normally when it's going up, they're focusing on the inflation and the inflation trade and the effect of the tariffs and what they're going to do to inflation, and that pushes the need for that results in the Federal Reserve having to push rates up. When they push it down, it's they're more looking at the markets looking at the economic growth and the slowdown in economic growth, which actually can necessitate a decline in official interest rate. So it depends which one they're looking at. Now, the other one that they have started focusing on now is actually the level of US debt overall. And that is quite staggering. And that was the website I had up earlier. Would you be able to put that up, Nicole? I just thought this, for those of you who haven't seen it. So this is the US debt clock. And that number at the top left, well, all of the numbers are pretty interesting actually, but that number at the top left is 36 trillion. That's in real time how much it's going up. Now, this clock is actually in Times Square, and I think it was in the term of President George W. Bush that they had to stop it because it went to 10 trillion. So they had to actually stop and add another naught on. So it's gone from 10 trillion to 36 trillion. So when did he finish? 2008, I think. So that's how much it's gone up. Now, if you look at that one on the top left, the US debt is going up about $1 million every 30 seconds. Their interest will soon exceed that of defence spending. It will get to about $1 trillion a year. And this is what the markets are starting to get a wee bit concerned about, is that actual level of US debt. Now, it equates to about 114% of GDP. New Zealand, I think, is about 47%. Japan's about 220%, but Japan has very high private sector savings. New Zealand, while we rank well with public sector debt, we have very high private sector debt, which is our sort of fixation with mortgages. But I just thought, look, I put this up, this just sort of illustrates people to think about, you know, the numbers. I mean, that's about the biggest number you can get, 36 trillion and going up $1 million a day. $1 million every 30 seconds. So back to the presentation. So in New Zealand, the main occurrence lately has been the monetary policy statement, and in May where they pushed the cash rate down to 3.25%. And I'll show you some slides later on which show where the markets are projecting the OCR to go and what the outlook for it is. The next slide shows the your maturity profile. I think on the top left, the main thing is that you're policy compliant with all the parameters, all the relevant parameters of the Treasury policy. And your cost of funds as at 6th of June was 4.02%. Your total debt was 220 million. And that's actually declined because what we call pre-funding has come off. The next slide shows that policy compliance, and the one on the top left where it's got a laser pointer. Oh, it doesn't show it on the screen here, does it?
Unfortunately, it doesn't work on this. It's one of the failings of the screen.
Where that, you can see the blue and the green lines, the top of those, they have to be between the two red lines, the ones at the bottom and the ones at the top. So you can see that you're policy compliant, you're in a good position there. And your cost of funds, it will probably dip below 4%, the one on the screen, the chart on the top right, but probably that's the low water mark for the cost of funds. And because the floating rate is projected to go higher, which is the sort of the mustard coloured line, that includes your margin. There will be a gradual increase over the next few years on that interest rate, just as the markets preempt the end of the easing cycle and they enter the tightening cycle.
Is it possible to just go back to the previous slide today? Sorry, Mr. Chair, if that's right with you. Our current debt is sitting at about 220 million, is that right?
That's right, yes.
That includes 10 million of the pre-funding. So net debt 210. Net
Net debt is 210 million presently. Is that?
Oh, well, I mean, it's probably lower if you take into account what cash you, so the way the LGFA actually calculates it, it's also cash in the bank and any term deposits that you've got. So you actually had, the net debt, because there's 36 million there, that's a 10 million bank facility, isn't it, Nicole?
So any indicate, so where there's projections, there is some projections externally at the moment of 230 that would be incorrect. That'd be right.
That could be gross debt, but your net debt would be 26, so it's 196 million, I think, would be your net debt at the moment. But for the purposes of the interest rate risk management, we have to look at the gross debt, because that's what you have to pay interest on.
The gross debt is sitting at
220.
220. So in 220, you're saying 10 million of that is, just so I understand what that is, just to be clear.
So some of that is pre-funding, so we took out 30 million of pre-funding to be able to repay those debts as they fell due. In April we repaid 20 million of that, and we've still got 10 million sitting there, which will use to repay debt in the coming months.
So repaying debt in the coming months, what will our position be at that point?
Well, I think we were going to.
We've got 10 million due in August. So when that's repaid, it'll be down to 210.
The 210 will be our position by when?
That's August.
No, that's very helpful to know. Thank you.
But just add further questions before I head on the subject.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just trying to, thank you, Chair. Just trying to understand what pre-funding is. This a commonplace mechanism.
I was just going to ask that for
just is it I mean, it feels like it's taking out debt to repay debt, but I mean it's fixing that. That's the second question.
Do you want me to answer that,
Yeah.
Nicole?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what we do with pre-funding is the Standard & Poor's, who your rating agency, they have 5 or 6 different measures that they base a rating on. One of them is they take into account your liquidity, and liquidity is the for the liquidity calculation, they've got how much cash that you've got in hand, but also if you've got the next year's debt pre-funded. In other words, they don't want you to have an excessive amount of debt up for refinancing all at once, so they want you to pre-fund it, and that helps your liquidity score. So you might have a tranche of debt, well, this one, say you've got one in August this year, that can be pre-funded, so when they do your rating, they can see that it's pre-funded, so you don't have a risk for that pre-funding on that date.
So it's by request to us as the council, actually, rather than us. It's actually a mechanism that actually
It's
Yeah.
driven. It's
driven by who? By
by the rating agency.
By the
yes,
rating
it's not
agency.
driven by council.
no, and it's not a reflection of our inability to service the debt. It's just
They require it across the board.
right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fulton. We've got Councillor Williams and Councillor Ward.
So how does depreciation come into this scenario? With depreciating thing, we've got funds there for replacement, which is, I understand, quite a few $1 million. But if we actually have to replace those goods, we actually haven't got the money for it because we're borrowed internally on that. So how much does that stack up into the scenario?
That might be one for Jeff or Nicole.
Well, the depreciation fund is just a provision that we put aside for future replacement. It's not necessarily used in that current year. So within our capital works, we will have there's 3 divisions. There's levels of service, there's replacement, and there's growth, and they all have their different funding mechanisms. For replacement assets, we'll use depreciation to fund those, but the treasury function as a whole we look at the net deficits that are required right across all the accounts, and we borrow money that's required for those purposes. Depreciation fund, that's held as a special fund reserve. We only use it for replacement. So rather than invest those funds in a bank, we would have get an interest of say 4%. We would borrow it internally at the same rate, and which means that we are basically removing any cost of funds premium that's put on it when we borrow funds. So if we didn't have that reserve fund, yes, the debt would be a lot higher, but we do. So the position is that that's our net debt position which we report on.
So how much is that fund at the moment standing at? And if we needed to use it, how do we use it if we haven't got it? Is it lent out?
Well, if we use it, we put future the intergenerational equity starts losing tact because we don't have the funds to put in replacement in the future. And it's all part of our funding strategy that we are commended for by a number of organisations, that we are putting funds aside for future replacement. So we would probably never use those funds to repay debt, or else it puts us in a pretty sad position. We have lower debt, but the current generation would be actually benefiting from that, and future generations wouldn't. They would be put in a worse position.
But we have used those funds before, is that correct?
Only for replacement of assets
when
they fall due. So, and we're in a sort of a hybrid situation at the moment where we don't have enough replacement funds for the next sort of 10, 15 years in some accounts. We have to actually get fund to make up the difference to pay for those assets, and so that you get that hybrid effect, and that's where our net debt comes into play.
So the question is, number one, how much is that? And for example, the water main in the main street in Rangiora that's had a couple of 3 failures on it, which would be depreciated since it was originally put in, I presume. So would that depreciation fund be used for that?
I think our depreciation reserve at the moment sits, I think, don't quote me on this one, but somewhere between 40 and 50 million. That asset through the high street, that was a critical asset, and it was put in, I'm not sure what the date it was put in, but if it was depreciated from the day it was put in, and we only started depreciation around about 1996, somewhere around there, where it became quite mandatory for councils to start funding depreciation. A lot of councils still don't fund full depreciation, but we would use, if it's a replacement asset, we would use those funds first to replace that asset, and any difference would be from loan.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Just before we move on to Councillor Ward, just picking up on your point about the hybrid situation that we're in at the moment, is it fair to say that because typically councils went depreciation funding before 1996, that's why we're playing a bit of catch up on previous generations?
Yes, correct. We were depreciating things like plant, we had short-term life, those sorts of things were being depreciated, and we had depreciation funds for it. In the old days, you used to have what they used to be called redemption. It wasn't a redemption loan; it was a sinking fund, which council were obligated to put funds into for the replacement of their loan, and so they used to take loans out from around 5-10 years. Set up a sinking fund for it. It was administered. You'd pay into it. You'd pay that loan off, redeem it when it became due, and so forth. If you look right throughout the country, you'll see different methodology is being used for their assets. We've got one where we have elected, because we're a growth council, to put those funds aside, because we've done the projections, shown in our infrastructural strategy that if we don't put those funds aside, our future generations will be in trouble to actually fund those replacement of the assets when they come due.
Thank you. And also, again, before we go into Councillor Ward, apology as well. After Councillor Ward's question, we'll keep going through your presentation. Thank you for your patience. Councillor Ward.
My question relates back to the Mayor's question. Given that we've put aside the debt repayment for August already, going back to the 210 million debt level in August, is that the net debt level, or is that different, given that we've already got that money put aside?
It equates to the net debt level, so we'll use that 10 million in August to repay the debt, and it will just depend on, I guess, Capital Works at that time, whether we draw down any further, but that would be our position. We haven't taken on any further pre-funding at this point, so you can assume gross debt equals net debt at that point.
Just to the, please.
One more quick.
Yeah, well, just to clarify with the Chief Executive, it was raised by Councillor Williams around the High Street main. My understanding is there's been no conclusion on that and whether the main requires replacement, and that is be speculating to suggest otherwise. There is investigations being undertaken around the pipe and those other matters, but there's to say that that's due replacement is really speculating at this point in time, because of my understanding there's been no conclusion in that. Is that correct?
I'm not up to date with the replacement of it, but whatever the burst main was, any sections of that were put in place would have been funded by replacement funds that were available.
Can I just suggest, Mr. Chair, that matter is something that Jared would need to brief us on and not be speculated in our table around a water main, because it's a fairly major issue and we would need to make sure we've got all the information to us rather than relying on speculation at the moment, because that is just speculation.
We might be able to ask that question a bit later on, but thank you very much. Councillor Williams, final question before.
Just to reply on that one there, I was actually using that for an example of something major happens in Waimakariri for the depreciation can be used on something there that actually fails before the time. I was a wee bit concerned we've got money set aside for it, it's actually borrowed. We've lent on that money, so it's actually it's $50 million. That means their debt is getting close to 300 million rather than what we've been told.
Well, I've been advised if that was to be the case, then that would be funded in usual methods, but let's not speculate on that at the moment, because that is purely speculation.
Thank you for your clarity on the matter, Councillor Williams, and thank you, Ms. O'Neill. We'll hopefully get the opportunity to ask Jared a bit later in the meeting on that. Please.
I'm just weary of the time I've got. Yeah. So, when do you want me to finish by?
Given the fact that we possibly held up your presentation by a little bit of time, we'll give you a little bit more space. Would 22 possibly give you enough time?
Yeah, should be able to do it by then.
All right, thank you.
So I don't need to go through that. That's just the table of your borrowings and the interest rate swaps that you've got. Don't need that. Now here's the presentation. So this is the second part of it. Look, I don't actually have to say much on this. This is just shows 100 years of tariffs reducing. They went up in the 1930s, in the lead up to the Great Depression, and then they started coming down, and we've had them going down for 100 years. And then you can see that line. Well, that's going up now. Well, that's April. So you know it goes back 100 years, and that shows the extent of the reversal of the downward trend in tariffs. can't really say much else to that graph. I think it just tells it all. There has been some sort of resolution in the US-China trade war, in that the US imposed tariffs of 145% on China, and China imposed tariffs of, 110%, and they've been reduced to 30% on Chinese goods coming into the US and 10% on American goods. So that's, for a 90-day period. What happens after that? I mean, it's such a moving, it's such a dynamic situation. It's moving so quickly that we don't actually know. Now, I'm not giving any sort of indication of my political preferences here, but I would point out that the US-China trade deficit is about 300 billion. So the US imports 300 billion more than it exports. And something has to be done about that, because it does represent a drain on the US economy. But the problem is that the US can't compete with Chinese factories and producing cheap goods, and it's partly the result of the American consumer, because they want cheap goods, they want their cheap electronics, they want their cheap clothes, they want their cheap furniture. So it is one thing I think that justifiably has to be looked at. But what the answer is, I don't know. I mean, do you wean America off those cheap goods, and if you don't, and if you do, and you replace them with US made goods, then it pushes the inflation rate up. So look, it's a bit of a catch-22 on that one. The effect on tariffs of US firms' intentions. Now, I don't know if you can actually read that from there, but the interesting one to me is, well, there are a couple of interesting ones. That they're passing costs through to consumers. That's the most significant one. But the one that's third from the bottom, relocating production of services to the US, 7% and 3%. So one of the supposed desired effects of the tariffs is to replace imported goods with American-made goods. So, but only 7% of those in manufacturing are suggesting that they will relocate factories to the US, because it's it is a multi-decade investment if you want to build a new factory. Or recommission an old factory, and probably some of the old factories can't be recommissioned. So it's a difficult decision to make. And I mean, with the election cycle, well, the midterms are coming up in a year and a half, or just under a year, in a year and a half, and then the presidential election in 3.5 years. Do you make a multi-decade investment decision based on something that might be unwound in the next few years coming up? And this is another one I can't really say much on. I mean, I think the graph tells it all. It's Moody, to the global rating agency. It's their investment, it's their business confidence survey. It shows how it went down so significantly in the global financial crisis in 2008, 7 to 9. We had the COVID pandemic. There was a brief one below zero when we had the secondary sort of US banking, mini banking crisis. I mean, it fizzled out into nothing. And now you've had a significant downturn with the tariffs. So again, not much I can say on that one. Those are the US bond rates, and New Zealand bond rates, and German, what they call it a Bund in their BUND. So the German one is in blue, US in red, New Zealand in black. You can see that New Zealand reasonably closely follows the US. The interesting thing on this one is that, and because I can't use the laser pointer, when that sharp move up that we had, you can see it, well, I can't point to it unfortunately, but it's towards the right where there's a V in the US one. That was those Liberation Day tariffs and that big move up. But at the same time, and normally you can see that German bond yields move in the same direction, because they take their direction and their movements from US bond rates, but they actually went down in yield. So that meant that while the world investors were selling US bonds, they were actually buying German bonds. And the reason for that was that America was seen as less of an attractive investment destination, supposedly in times of what we call risk trading, risk-off trading. In other words, they want to de-risk. You would buy American bonds and sort of be, the first port of call. But in this occasion they were selling them, and the same happened on the equity markets. They were selling US equities and they were buying European equities and Asian equities. So what this whole situation has led to is that some people are actually questioning, well, not questioning, I mean, the US will remain the premier, global investment destination. It accounts for 40% of global world capital, but some fund managers that you find are just allocating slightly less to the US and are diversifying into other assets because they just don't quite see the US as that safe haven that it previously was. These are the monetary policy expectations for our cash rate. We're in the black, Australia is in the green, and the US is in the red. The main thing with us is that we're down at 3.25% now. The markets are projecting the OCR. They're not fully projecting it. In fact, the markets are more inclined to think that there's going to be a pause in July. There's an 84% probability that it will be at 3% by August, and 100% probability that it will be at 3% by October. But there is only a 68% chance that it will go to 275. And previously there was a 100% chance it would go to 275, and they were projecting a 60% chance it would go to 250. Now it's the only 100% probability from here is 3. So what's actually happened is that as there's been some sort of resolution with the trade for the meantime, of the tariff crisis or the tariff situation, it's actually meant that markets aren't quite so concerned about the downward economic effects. So at the moment, well, I think the important take on this is that we're probably at the end of we're probably close, unless there's some sort of other geopolitical or economic shock. Maybe only one more rate cut, and that may be it. But that means we've still had 250. That will mean we've had 2.5% of rate cuts, which is the second highest we've ever had since the official cash rate came in as the tool with which to manage monetary policy. Those are the banks' intentions. The different banks where they see the OCR and the Reserve Bank. So probably the two outliers there are Westpac, who see it only getting 3% and then climbing to 3.5%, and then you've got ANZ seeing it down at 2.5%. So those are the range of the expectations from the bank economists.
Councillor Fulton.
Second, Miles, just our internal economics, including inflation and interest rates. How much more room do you think there's for government to, given the interest rates, for instance, to stimulate the economy? I heard Prime Minister Luxon was quoted this morning talking about that tourism needs to get back to sort of 2019 levels, visitor numbers. And that's always been a bit of a sugar hit, hasn't it? Should it basically bring in more revenue to the country through tourism, through whatever form that takes? What are some of the levers that the government could pull to stimulate the economy, given that our interest rates are down at base level, business is still struggling heavily? That's a big question there. I mean, it's normally agriculture and tourism that you sort of manipulate, isn't it, as much as you can?
I was actually talking about this with someone yesterday, and I mean, what are the two factors in the economy that are performing well? Well, it's agriculture. And with the dairy price, the beef price, even I think sheep prices are firming up a bit at the moment. And yes, well, we're actually talking about tourism. 87%, I think it's at, of pre-COVID levels at the moment. I don't think there's too much that the government can do to stimulate tourism.
Chinese tourism isn't what it was. The mass market tourism's changed, hasn't it? No, things have changed. Yeah.
I think maybe some of the tariff situation is more people visiting the US rather than the US coming here. But they have announced there was a measure that was announced to do with the depreciation on property, which commercial property operators, the ones who big commercial developments, and that was actually going to have a significant boost, because I think, don't quote me on this if this is the press, but I think that you can immediately depreciate 20% of an asset, and that would actually have because because we act for a number of the REITs, the real estate investment trusts, and they said that could actually have a significant effect. So they are doing that. But it's really, the infrastructure spend as well, and governments. So really, how does the government stimulate the economy? Well, they can stimulate it through spending, and the Reserve Bank through lowering interest rates. And on that point, maybe it's just worth noting that we have a significant number of fixed rate mortgages coming off in the next 6 months, and those were ones that were refinanced. So when people's 3% mortgages rolled off and they rolled off into 7%, they fixed it not for too long because they got to the paying threshold. They couldn't afford for them to go up anymore. So they thought, well, we'll only fix them for a year to 18 months because we think that interest rates are at their peak. Well, that was right. And now these mortgages are coming up for replacement, for refinancing again, and they're at about 5%. So there's going to be about a 2% gain on that. So that's going to put more money into the economy. And that's going to be quite significant too.
Okay. Yeah, but before we get to Councillor Ward, we might just give Miles the opportunity to finish his presentation, if that's all right.
Nearly there. That's the official cash rate in red, the 90-day rate in black, the 3-year swap rate, which is the wholesale rate in the light blue, and the dark blue is the 5-year swap rate. The interesting thing here is that while the OCR and the 90-day rate have continued to go down, the 3 and the 5-year swap rates, and if I went further out, the 10-year swap rates are going up. So this is indicative of this sort of turn, the end of the monetary policy, the end of the OCR easing cycle. The markets are actually starting to preempt the end of the easing cycle by pushing up those swap rates, because that is market driven. The OCR is totally driven by the Reserve Bank, and the 90-day rate, you see, very closely follows the OCR. I don't know if you can read this, and this is actually replicated from the last presentation that I gave you. Unfortunately, it's not, this is what the LGFA put out, and as far as council covenant compliance goes, and it just shows that waimakariri is at 134% as debt to revenue ratio. Now, this is an LGFA requirement. Can you see that on your screens, or no? Okay. The average, so you can actually have debt to revenue of 285%. You're at 134%. So you've got significant ability to borrow more and still be within the LGFA debt covenants. The debt to revenue covenant, that's the main one that they look at. The other ones are the interest coverage ratios, interest as a percentage of rates and interest as a percentage of revenue, and your liquidity ratio. So I think the main point is the average is 120. You're at 134, so you're just basically on the average. You're just above the average, and there are some that are significantly higher than you. This is sort of an endorsement of your debt capacity and the fact that you're not over borrowing, and that you are in a very sound position as far as your debt goes. I don't think there's been much change to it. As I say, they only produce it after the end of every financial year, which is 30 June.
Very much. Was that the?
I won't go through this. That was just your previous debt cover one, and this is probably more for the management. What these interest rate swaps that we're looking at, probably with the better, because we haven't got too much time. You don't want me to go through these, do you?
Possibly just the brief.
Well, we will be looking to do a couple of interest rate swaps. We don't have to. I don't think we have to for probably we don't have to do anything. It's probably a year or so that we don't have to do them. So we're actually in a very good position. We've got two choices. We start the swaps now, and the rates would be 3.44 and 3.69, which actually aren't bad rates. The 90-day rate's 3.30. It's not much above it, and so it will push your cost of funds up slightly, but you get a benefit further out. If we rectified the policy compliance and we started them later on, then the rates are one of the rates is quite high. It's starting at 28 and going out to 31. The rate's 4.22. But what that does is that it gives you really, or what I'm trying to say here is that we've got two choices. Either we do an interest rate swap that starts now and it costs you a bit more now, but you get the benefit later on, or if we start one later on, you get the benefit now, but the cost later on. So I think that's probably one for management to decide, you know, which is the preferred option. And that's the cost of funds, and that's it.
So, thank you very much. Calling for final questions. We have one from Councillor Ward, Councillor Reedman, yeah, and Councillor Williams.
Thank you. My question really follows on from the tourism and increasing, trying to increase the monies spent in New Zealand, but how do we bring into our universities the international students that have been turned away from America? How do we promote that? Because that could be a really good, as much as tourism, it could be a very good assistance to bringing money into the country.
Yeah, it's probably not something I don't really look at, you know, those sort of policy details as far as education concerned. It's probably a wee bit above me. I did hear the other day though that University of Canterbury had record levels, I think 25,000 students, and you know it was higher than pre-COVID levels. So you know it might actually come down to the ability of the universities to cater for those students. Actually, you know, have the physical capability of accommodating them. But yes, say it's probably not something, you know, that's going into detail. It's not sort of in my field of expertise.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Miles, thanks for coming along. I always enjoy your presentations. At your last presentation, you said our debt was not out of control, and I've sort of got the impression that that may still be your view. Is that still your view, or has anything happened that would cause you to change that view?
No. That's probably the
clear.
That's very clear, thank you for that. I had one other question. You mentioned the US imports and the imbalance with China. Does that factor in the fact that a lot of American companies are manufacturing in China and they're repatriating the goods home? Is that part of that imbalance?
Yes, it is.
So it gets very complicated.
Yeah.
And my final question was, given the debt calculator, which I guess is only as good as the information that's fed into it, with the trillions clicking over, what's your view of the end game for the US?
I was asked that question the other day, and I don't know. I mean, there have been books written about it. There have been theses written about it at universities, and I don't quite understand where all this ends, to be quite honest. I mean, the theory behind it is that if the debt's going up, that's okay as long as your GDP is going up, and it's really the debt to GDP number. But the US has been going up, so you're familiar with the debt to GDP calculation. The US is projected to go higher. I honestly don't know. The theory is that you inflate your way out of it, so you grow the economy. And while the headline number goes up, your debt to GDP number goes down because you've increased economic output. I wish I knew the answer to it, and I don't. And I'm not sure too many people do.
Well, appreciate the comments.
Just look, it'd be very helpful, Miles, if you haven't already supplied. Can we get a copy of the slides that you prepared? Yeah, that would be really helpful to see. In that table, let's say slide number 15, of those where it's got the debt comparison, do you know in your work how many are funding depreciation like our council is? Because I've been quite interested to find out as we talk with others, just that we appear to be a bit of an outlier, some where we are funding depreciation. Not all councils are in the same position, and I'd just be interested to know of those, are you aware, roughly speaking, how many are funding depreciation certainly to the level that we are?
I'm not sure of that, so I'm not sure of what the answer to that is. I mean, Jeff or Nicole may know. I know that some councils did stop funding depreciation as a means to improve their financials and improve their debt levels, but as to specifics,
So if you don't know, it's okay.
I
It's just I'm just interested to see on the table, but appreciate your presentation and expertise as always. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Now mine was the same question as far as getting this presentation, because everybody was acting as though we had it, we haven't actually got it to discuss.
Deputy Mayor.
Phil's first question was just one question actually, but the other one is around councils in general. And I know you don't deal with them all, but are you aware of any councils around New Zealand who don't have debt?
we act for 38 councils, and they all have debt. If you're looking at net debt, some of them don't, and I'm just thinking because they have quite big investment funds, and this was often related to the selling of power assets. I think New Plymouth might be in a net investment position.
It's all right, you.
I
Just
can't.
just by the hesitation of your answer, you've answered my question, that's all.
I mean, just about everyone, I mean, even the Chatham Islands has debt. I think they have about $500,000 of debt. I'm just thinking, none of. Oh, you thinking about Environment Southland, Jeff?
Yeah, there's one down south, I'm not sure.
Environment Southland doesn't have debt, and they have quite a, at the moment, I don't think, and they have quite a significant investment in Southport and an investment fund. That's the first one that comes to mind. And as I say, New Plymouth might have debt, might not, but they have significant investment funds.
And final question from
Thank you, Miles, for coming along. One of your slides talked about the cost of funds being 4.02%. I'm assuming that's reflective of how fiduciarily responsible we are with regard to how we manage our business. How does that compare with regard to other councils? How much interest are they paying for the cost of funds?
I just did a slide. I actually should have included in this. I thought about it yesterday and then it slipped my mind. We've got a graph of all our councils' cost of funds. So it's about 38. We don't have access to, we have one main competitor, we obviously don't have access to theirs. The lowest was 3.44% and the highest was 5.02. And I can actually, it's just a graph with each council on it, but it's not, there's no attribution. The only one that we should have any attribution to is you. So I can actually send that through to Nicole, and it will actually just show you compared to where you sit with the other ones.
Wow. Thank you. All right. Well, I think that's it. So thank you very much for your patience, Miles. It's been a very thorough conversation. I've really enjoyed my colleagues' input. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing those slides sent through.
Yeah, and I'll include that one. Just one on that question that you asked about. There are some that are up around sort of 4.755%. They were actually unusual circumstances. One was a council holding company that actually gets funded from the council, and there's a high cost of funds associated with it, but the council gets the benefit of it. So it's high there. The council gets funding from the LGFA, and there were two or three in there that actually just happened to go into a debt situation recently when interest rates were at their peak. So if you see those sort of outliers, there is a reason for those outliers when I send it through. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, moving right along, we've got Yvonne from Audit New Zealand. Morning. floor is yours.
Good morning. Do I drive this or? Yes. Oh, yes. Good. The audit plan for 2025 annual report is included in your pack. In addition to that audit plan, I will be presenting an overview of the plan along with a update on the current status of the audit to you guys. So I'll be covering 3 topics. One is a summary of the audit plan, and then the procurement practice review, and lastly I will be talking about the status update. Firstly, the summary of the audit plan. This page gives you the overview of the key areas of audit focus, sector interest area, and the material performance measure. This year's audit scope remains largely consistent with the prior year, so you will see all the red lines with the stars are the new areas of focus or interest area. With the exception an increased focus on the capital projects, accounting, and the procurement contract management. We have also refreshed our assessment of material performance measures, introducing a new performance measure rolling response time as a newly selected key measures. What I want to highlight is the sector interest area. I have heard quite a few discussion in the previous session about how other councils' debt's going, etc. So as part of the local government reform program, the Department of Internal Affairs is set to benchmark council performance. So there's a benchmark reporting will coming out, as far as I know, it's coming out this month. And the council should be given a chance to comment on a feedback, and that report is expected to include several council performance metrics, including rates, council debt, capital expenditure, balanced budget, and road condition. And the legislation is expected to amend it to allow future benchmarking reports to include a comparison of contracts and consultant expenditure alongside as a matrix. So I would recommend this report to be reviewed by the committee when it's due release. The next slide is the audit timeline. The audit timeline is planned consistent with prior year, with the expectation for the current council to adopt the 2025 annual report before the election. There's some very minor changes compared to the annual plans you have received in the agenda that we shuffle around our pre-final to be able to prepare a early pre-election adoption. We have planned for additional time before or around year end, which is the first couple of weeks of July, to perform the land revaluation and some performance reporting sampling tests. Procurement practice review. So this is a additional new focus area for this year annual audit. And in light of the recent improvements the council has implemented in procurement and contract management, we have proposed a high-level review of the council's procurement practice as part of this year's annual statutory audit. The purpose of this review is twofold, and one is to acknowledge and celebrate the positive changes introduced by management, and also to provide any additional insights that may further strengthen the practice going forward. So this review is being conducted as a value-added component of the statutory audit, and there will not be any additional costs to the council. And this slide is just to show you our scope and approach, and this is performed by our specialist assurance and audit team. The timeline is roughly August. And lastly, the status update for our audit going so far. It has been going very well. we have percentage of completion around 26% as of last week, and expected to be 45% by the end of July after our pre-final is completed, which is going to be well advanced compared to prior years. Key infrastructure asset variation, subject to the indexing movement review up to June 2025. We have already reviewed the fair value assessment up to March, and we concur with management position not to revalue street waters and land for the annual report purpose, due to the movement is not material to the financial statement. Roading and bridges infrastructure assets will be revalued. That is aligned with Council's valuation policy, which is on annual basis. We have not identified any significant control deficiencies so far. However, IT and payroll control assessment and rate system review are still underway. We will report any new findings and recommendations in our final report to the Council. Thank you. We would like to thank management and all the staff here, the assistance throughout so far. Thank you. Happy for answering questions.
Thank you very much. So far we've got Councillor Reedman, followed by Fulton. Councillor Reedman.
Thank you, Yvonne, for coming along and talking about the audit plan. I wonder, can you confirm how the scope of your audit is different to a private sector audit? And why I ask is, it seems to me from reading social media that even some elected members don't understand your role. On page 26, you say, as part of the wider public sector audit, we're also required to be alert to the issues of effectiveness and efficiency, waste, and a lack of probity or financial prudence. And on page 35, you talk about the definition of materiality, which is broader than the one used in the private sector. So can you explain the scope of your audit and whether a new elected member is likely to uncover anything that you wouldn't have uncovered?
I can't speak of private sector. I just want to get more understanding where or what exactly you would like me to respond to. One question is, you would like me to explain our audit scope compared to private sector?
Compared to the private sector, it seems to me that it's much broader and you have a whole lot of different focus areas on what I'll call the business.
Yeah, compared to a private sector audit, not a private firm audit, a council.
Compared with a private sector audit.
Right, yeah. So for a private sector audit, I do have experience on it. So I do come from a private audit firm and also have the experience in private sector audit. It is quite different. For a public audit, the accounting standard that we require as Audit New Zealand for all the local government audits, we are required to follow the Office of Auditor General auditing standard. Compared to a private sector audit, they will be following international auditing standard or New Zealand auditing standard for private sector. So as overarchingly, the auditing standards are different. There are some very notable difference. For example, what your second question point talk about the property, the sensitive expenditure, wasteful spending. That is a particular area for OAG's auditing standard that requires us to do. Obviously, that is a high level of public interest as for the public sector. Following to your second point around materiality, that is also a really good point. That is also a notable difference. If I just looking at my page of materiality. Usually for a private sector audit, it depends on the nature of the entity. It's for my experience, it is quite unusual to have overall majorities sits on or calculate based on infrastructure assets. And obviously, as local government, it is very heavily asset-oriented entity. So your balance sheet, your most notable significant balance is your infrastructure assets, land and buildings, and your WIP balance. So to be able to have a more efficiency and really focus on the main area, we calculate a overall maturity based on the property, plant, equipment balance. So when we assess the fair value assessment, we use that maturity to have a really kind of a matching maturity rather than have a lower P&L maturity to assess the infrastructure asset. So we do have the specific lower maturity, which is on the page is 4.3 million. That is calculated based on the total expenditure, where we focus on the testing on revenue and expenditure on a income statement level. So that is quite different from my experience with public sector audit. Obviously, no audit public sector audit will have large amount of infrastructure assets. That is quite particular to public sector audit. There are a few other differences. I think there's another page which probably talks about related party. So there's one sentence. I'm not sure what page on you, but it's page 11 on our audit plan. Is the maturity page. The last sentence talks about a lower specific maturity is determined and applied for related party and key management personnel disclosure. That is also quite specific for the public entities, that we would apply a lower maturity, usually a 5% of line item for key management personnel disclosure due to the requirement from LGA. Schedule 10. Thanks.
Would it be fair to say then that the Auditor General performs a sort of public watchdog role?
Yeah, definitely that's his role, the public watchdog.
Right, thank you very much for that, Yvonne. Very comprehensive answer.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Fulton, followed by Councillor Williams and the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to ask about the public watchdog. You are an independent statutory authority and ombudsman and others, independent of government departments and the politics of the day. So we're heading with this. Now we have Department of Internal Affairs doing their own benchmarking. They are a government department, taking direction from a shareholding minister. Do we now have a parallel auditing system for local government? How are they going to be different in their function? From your understanding, I know that this is recent news. How does it affect us?
So for the role of DA, they are not a auditor.
But they are benchmarking.
Yeah. Benchmarking does not mean audit. They present information and they don't apply. Well, I can't actually speak of on behalf of DI. We will wait to see what the report looks like. But the Office of Auditor General is the public watchdog, not DI has their own role.
Okay, so follow up. Do you benchmark? I know, sorry,
David's very respectful.
But yeah, okay, that they don't benchmark, but do you benchmark councils then? Audits. I mean, you must have some comparability.
Yeah.
So that's where my question comes from about parallel auditing on a benchmarking basis, and also us specifically as a council. So I know this is a lot.
The Office of General does do benchmarking. They do release reports. I think the recent one, they do release a report around the 2024 long-term plan. But from their point of view, they would really comment on the council's performance from a auditor perspective, that they observe whether or not a council would be getting, has been given a adverse opinion or any qualification around that, or any emphasis of matter paragraph that is their audit results that they report on. Obviously, all our audit feed into that benchmarking.
So, in your professional opinion, which audit is more pertinent to our financial sustainability and our banking arrangements and our ability to stand up to independent scrutiny on a financial basis?
Which audit?
Which of if you've had the DIA and their assessment and you have your assessment, which is the more significant? You are an independent statutory body, aren't you?
I think there's different perspectives. We as an auditor will be report on what actually required by the auditing standard and the perspective from the Office of Auditor General. The IA, they taking a monitoring role, and obviously they have their ministry hat in relation to local government reform and the policy setting. The real kind of, obviously the OAG is the watchdog, but we don't intervene in any policy setting. And while the DIA is taking the policy setting role for innocent village, the local government, and they are doing a local government reform at the moment.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Mayor, I find this very enlightening. Is there any information today which would can feed into our own reports or our own consideration of the DIA's role and what we do? I'm sure that this is not just a question directed at
The questions asked of our audit director is probably a little bit unfair.
Yes.
Just to put my perspective on it, we do an annual plan, we do a long-term plan. Long-term plan is audited by Audit New Zealand. Our annual report is what I consider our accountability to a community. It has the non-financial performance measures in there. They've been set by government domain. There's mandatory ones there. Audit New Zealand come in, they look at those, they audit them, and they see whether they're accurate, and we're reporting them fair and reasonably to our community. It is the report which I think the community should read. The DIA, under a different authority, have decided to collate a lot of council factors, such as rates, debt to revenue, things like that. It's fair to say that it got a pretty adverse reaction from our elected officials. And the rationale for that is that, and I agree with this comment, is that no two councils are alike, and I think Audit New Zealand would probably agree with that from the audits. The water supply in one area and its terrain, its geographics and stuff like that, it's different to another council. Some councils have covered swimming pools, they have a lot more libraries, they have a lot more population than other councils. Some councils are rural, some councils are peri-urban, some councils are city. And what the DIA have done is they've crudely knocked them up into 3 or 4 different divisions depending on the population and maybe other factors. But once again, every council is different. They have different activities that they provide to the communities, and I think you've got to look at the actual demands from communities and the levels of service which communities demand. You have a situation, if you do, let's take our council and like it from the say Hiranui next to our neighbours. They'll have a high staff ratio because they have the hammer pools. But it doesn't mean that they don't have they don't have the staff at the right level. And so these are the sorts of numbers that they'll be comparing councils with, and it's probably a little bit unfair. It's probably going to cause a lot of speculation, and we'll probably have to actually provide the answers to our community why we're different to another council, or why we're better than another council. I don't know, I haven't seen the numbers yet. I think they're still working through the parameters and what sort of information they're going to provide. So that just gives an indication of what's happening, but I think giving the IA some credit, they're trying to actually find what is a good balance for a council. What is the range that a council should be providing certain services within? And I think this way we're sort of looking at that is you sit in the middle of the pack, you sit at the higher of the pack. If you're sitting below, then we need to understand why is that? And I think it's going to cause a lot of discussion, but I think that in the main, if everyone's got the right attitude, that should provide improvement.
Just a supplementary to that, through you, Mr. Chair, do you believe there is an onus from the council to quickly explain some of that context to the community, because they are so different in their focus? And we're preparing for that. Yeah, we are. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Just like to touch on a wee bit on roading revaluations. How does that actually work when we don't know what funding we're going to get from the government towards our roading? That varies from year to year. Are all of our roading assets, we've got, for example, I'll name Lees Valley Road is probably not a viable road to actually own, but we have to keep it maintained and all that. So how do you go about giving a valuation on something there that varies from storm to storm, you could probably put it? We've got fords across rivers there that have to be rebuilt after each time we get a storm event. So how can you actually get a proper valuation on our roading systems? Just, I'm curious about it, that's all.
So for the roading valuation, the council engaged an external expert who has wide range of portfolio of local government infrastructure assets. So they do provide expertise into it, and there is a methodology behind it. There's a variation standard they follow. Basically, it is a optimized replacement cost model. While there's some technology into it, but basically thinking about this as of June balance sheet date, you have a portfolio of rolling assets, and they would make their judgment call and assumption into it that say how much the council will need to replace the whole portfolio as of now. And they taking into account the indexing, they taking into account the council's current contract rates throughout the year. Recently, also we will talk to your engineer about the asset status. They will rely on a certain level of the surveys that either the council or contractor conducted, so to understand the status of the assets. So and there's some level of optimization into it as well. And from our perspective, we review all the judgment assumption into it, and obviously challenge the value of the assumption. And we also have a level of database internally around Canterbury and South Island that we benchmark to as well, get us a certain level of assurance around that.
So if they factor into replacement of these roads, surely every road would be a liability, because obviously the roading is probably one of our most expensive networks that's been done from years and years ago, but if we factor into replacement, it'll be, they won't be worth any valuation on, they'll be a liability. So I'm not trying to be, I see our CA smiling here trying to get over this question, but it's
that's a good point. I'm missing one part. Thank you for that. So into the variation, the total replacement costs can consider as of certain date there's also two other elements, is the useful life of the assets, and also so that fit into a depreciation from the replacement cost. So the carrying amount is calculated based on the replacement cost minus the depreciation. So for a SSA, the value will be assessing the remaining useful life. As you say, some of council's assets may, soon for due. So for example, there will be only 1 year to go, and that value will be very minimum compared to the actual total replacement cost.
So do they take consideration of storms, earthquakes and all that drama? Because we don't know when we're going to have a storm or an earthquake and damage on that road. So how do they factor? I noticed in the water they have 1 in 200 year floods and all that drama, but those 100 year floods are coming every year sort of thing now. So how
the climate change is
It's referring to impairment.
so the natural disaster provision into the valuation, I don't think there's a certain element into it, but it's the valuation is looking at a certain date of status. So the earthquake element, they would only consider about what earthquake damage has been caused so far, rather than looking to the future. The future position is taken into account as part of the impairment assessment, rather than the variation as of certain date.
Thank you for that. It's sort of not quite there, but I just wondering whether it'd be worthwhile for people that do assess that value. We'd have a workshop one day on how the roads are valued and all that drama, so we'd actually probably have a to see exactly how it works, because it's quite a complicated system, I think, it sounds like it.
There's definitely specialists in that field, so I think it's simpler for us all.
We have a RAM database which basically holds sort of the condition of our roads and so forth, and it's something. It's interesting. The council's got an interest in it, but over the years since we've been doing the road evaluations, we have these sorts of discussions with the valuers, and then the auditors come in and the same sort of discussions occur. And over the years, we've actually made huge improvements of the way we value the roads. The one you talked about, storms, what everyone just referred to then was it's as at. So whatever the road was as at that date and condition in our system is how it's valued. They take into consideration if there's a storm just before it. We went through this process before when we had the earthquakes, and we had to put huge impairments across all of our assets. In fact, we didn't get a clear audit that year because we couldn't determine the damage to the assets, and therefore we got a qualification on our audit report. But the following year, because we were able to ascertain what the damage was to our assets, we were able to put that impairment in, and then we had that large capital program and debt program to actually put them back to the position of where they should have been, and better. So we went through that process, but over the years since we've been doing this, we've had those same sort of discussions. With roading, it's the only asset, because of the extent of the value of the asset, we do annually. And that's, I'm not sure how many councils in New Zealand do roading annually. I thought we might have set the trend.
I have another one, not many.
But it avoids those huge peaks and troughs that you get through depreciation and the value that you put into the road. So let's say if you had inflation of 7% per year and you only valued it every 3 years, you've got a 22% or 23% increase in value, which you then have to actually account for in the rates in the annual plan for the following year. And so therefore, if you do it annually, you're capturing that increase in value every year instead of every 3 years.
Thank you. Just noting that time does march on. Mr. Mayor.
No, I'll leave mine for debate in the next report that's coming out.
Final question, Councillor Fulton.
I suspect this sounds like debate, but we're talking about impairment. Just say because of my colleague, the question he raised using Red Valley as an example. This is a very good example. When I came out of the community board, my question was just the other day. I think basically our capitalisation and budgeting requires us to repair to like state, and so that's the road like that would be part of our annual budgeting. It's not to improve, it's not to increase the value, but it's to return to a like state. So is that an example of a road and impairment? I suppose I have to ask a question, that we have. I know you're not familiar with the Red Valley High Country Road. Thank you.
We will be assessing as part of the audit.
Thank you.
See what I have to deal with.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for that presentation. We are moving on to discuss the plan.
That's why they do it so much now.
All right. Paul.
Too much coffee today.
Keep taking the drugs.
Is that the key?
You're working
From lots of different shops.
Thank you. Paul, I have a feeling that Yvonne may have answered some of the more peculiar questions of today's meeting.
Kia ora. This report is to inform the committee of the financial performance for the 9 months to the end of March. The surplus to the end of March was 3.1 million. This compares to a budgeted surplus of 9.5 million. The main cause of that expenditure was actually 2.4 million under budget, but revenue was also under budget by 8.7 million, so it's revenue that's down, causing that surplus to be down. And that revenue that's down is in development contributions. I think there's some discussion of that in the report. On debt, actually I think I need to clarify, so because there's been a few numbers running around in this meeting about debt. In the report, I'm talking about debt of 240 million gross and 210 million net. And Miles' earlier presentation, he was talking about 220 million. The difference is this report talks about our position at March. Miles was talking about our position today. And in between times, we've repaid 20 million. So that's why there's that difference between what Miles was talking about and what this report says. But at the end, the position will be at 220 million and 210 net. The budget and that we had for the end of this year was 236 million. And one of those statements that I like to talk about is the cash flow statement. The cash flow from operations was 35.1 million. That compares to 27.1 for the same time last year. So with that cash, we have spent 37.5 million on assets, and the borrowing, there's been a 40 million increase in borrowing, but that 40 million includes that 30 million that we've increased so that we can repay the loans. Are there any questions on the report?
Just for clarity for the colleagues, I believe we jumped to 5.2 and we'll go back to 5.1. But are there any questions on 5.2? There appear to be none. Right, we've got a report in front of us. Do I have a mover? Councillor Fulton, seconded.
5.1, yes, just clear. Yeah.
5.2, and then we're going back to 5.1.
Worried, no.
So currently we're discussing a financial report for the period to 31st March. Okay.
We're dealing with 5.2 first, aren't we?
Yep.
And then coming to 5.1.
Yeah, we're just keeping everyone on their toes today. Right, so we've got a mover and seconder, Councillor Fulton.
Happy to support. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, there's a few things sort of related to the last two presentations really. While there are some numbers that are not quite met and others that are extremely good. I think the last two presentations have summed up where we are, and when I hear advisor from Bay Corp sitting there using words, not over borrowing, sound position, good position, 134% average, and sitting in the middle of where others are. And when I'm hearing language like that, and I'm hearing from our auditor positive change, going very, very well at this point, and that we're good to engage with, then we are clearly in a good space. And while there are things that will always be challenging and things that we will always not quite get right in figures in our projections, I think that Paul, you and your team do a really good job to get us to where we are, and I am very comfortable where this council sits in its financial performance.
Oh, thank you. Oh, just to clarify, Miles is from Bancorp, not Bancorp.
Oh, sorry, did I say Bancorp?
Bancorp's the one we don't want to hear.
He won't be at some stage.
We're just checking we're on
Yeah,
our toes.
Any further speakers to the report, Mr. Mayor?
Just briefly to say, really proud of our council's performance, and I think we all should be. Endorse the comments of the Deputy Mayor. It's very useful to have Miles's presentation here today as an external, and I really want to ask for a copy of those slides, as I think they're very useful for us to understand. It's a complex thing, a financial picture that's put together of an organisation like this that's doing exceptional delivery for our community. To unwind, to understand would be to unwind quite a lot in here, and I think right across our organisation, from Jeff, Nicole, Paul, all across our organisation, we're extremely well served with the advice that we receive. We are a AA rated council, and that doesn't come easily. We've earned that over many years of our stewardship, and that's not to say that we should be arrogant or complacent in our place. We can always learn different ideas. I'm open to ideas that come through, genuine ideas of where savings can be achieved and where we can do things better. That's why we've put ourselves out to the Local Government Excellence Program on a number of occasions. The DIA, as was mentioned before by Councillor Fulton, I don't think any of us are especially looking forward to their report because it hasn't been collaborative with our sector. I don't mind external, and we should be open to external reviews, but this one here is based on what we understand a New South Wales model, and it is lumping us all together, and I think the words that the CE used before was words and others used on the call. One size definitely doesn't fit all, and when you look at our financial picture, when we've had natural disasters, we've had a range of different things that have put in pressure. They hadn't even considered that. They are now, I understand, going to be looking at that, and I suspect I don't know if we've received that dashboard yet, Jeff, the draft, but it was due last week. Appears that it still hasn't arrived, so we'll see. We were to get it last week and then have 2 weeks to get our information back to them, and then they were going to release it at the end of the month. Whether that's been delayed, and that's probably a good thing, well, it is a good thing. Our sector through LGNZ have really been trying very hard to get change in that, on that, because it's one thing to get that information, but it's useful. And that's the point I made, is that it's useful for our communities. And I have reached out to the Minister's office to make that point, that we're not opposed to getting external review and information, but it's where it's useful to us, and that's where Audit New Zealand do provide that function for us each and every single year, and we put that report out, and we go out and we ask our public for their view. That's the best test of whether we've got it right or not. But we will await that information with interest, and I suspect we will need to make sure that, as Councillor Fulton's mentioning before, that we have some external comms around that to explain it where we relatively sit in any table that's put forward. It is what it is. We can complain about it, but it's coming. So just have to brace ourselves, prepare ourselves for that, and we'll see where we sit. But we've done our best to try and get the message across. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily DIA. They've been under a government direction on this to deliver it. So, and the Prime Minister and Minister made that clear at the last local government conference of what they were rolling out. It's a bit of a shame, I think, personally, in timing, that they're racing it without being more collaborative with us, so we have something that's meaningful for not only our council but our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No further speakers. Right of reply, Councillor Fulton.
Just commend colleagues for their remarks there. Just to add that, as far, particularly with reference to the DIA and their assessment tool, if they're using dashboards, there has to be recognition that people and communities don't live in dashboards. That basically that we as councils are subject to a whole range of variables, including what falls from the sky, the way the earth shakes, anything that you might imagine. And I think that we have to always be flexible and responsive to our own community's needs first and foremost. So comparing us to a whole range of councils in the way that they seem to be proposing, I think it's insufficiently inflexible, and it just doesn't account for the way that people actually live their lives and the way they're affected. And so that's my broad comment there. Otherwise, but as far as thank you for the reporting that we are getting, I'm quite sure that we're a very sound position, and ironically it happens to be much sounder than a lot of other councils, but I won't go too much into that line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fulton. I just want to add that I think that was the most discussed financial report update period for a quarter that I've actually so thank you very much, colleagues. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. All right, Paul, we'll just quickly scan through 5.1, approving the audit plan, if that's all right. Do you have anything further to add?
No, I don't think I have. I think Yvonne's presentation was covered most of the points that you would have wanted to ask.
Any further questions? Oh, Mr. Mayor's moving. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second from the chair. Mr. Mayor.
The very good questions through the earlier part when Yvonne was here, but I just want to place on record thanks to Yvonne and Audit New Zealand. We are very fortunate, I think, to work with exceptional individuals at Audit New Zealand, and Yvonne is one of those individuals. Jeff and I and our staff have a lot more to do with it than I do, but the times and engagements we have with her, she's very professional, she's well over our organisation, and also I've found where there's been queries and where we've adequately explained where our position is, she's prepared to take it on, but also to ask us the tough questions, which is what an auditor is there to do. We're very fortunate to have her service and Audit New Zealand. The fact that we're one of the first to get audited in the country is something that's testament to this council's performance. I sit at other forums, and others of you will have been there, where there are councils around the country that are never in the first tranche and are waiting and are complaining about waiting for where they sit. So we are very fortunate, in my personal opinion, to be in the position we're in. The audit is what it is, and the audit plan is what it is. It's prescribed by law. We challenge their fees and other things all the time. But I do think my concern about the costs periodically, but I do think we do get good value from Audit New Zealand, and the fact that we're in the first tranche of that is something, as I've mentioned, we should be proud of, and that speaks volumes to the performance of our staff here, that they want to undertake that early in the piece. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I fully support the report.
I'll reserve my right. Councillor.
Thank you. I'd endorse those comments from the Mayor. Very good. I support the recommendation, and I'd also like to go a wee bit further and suggest that all prospective council candidates should read the audit plan and understand the role of the Auditor General. The public sector is very different from the private sector, as Yvonne has explained. And why I say this is that I've fallen into a bad habit that I must try and stop of looking at social media. And one prospective candidate has said, from my experience going in to sort out business, it is amazing what you uncover when you get access to the books. Well, given the scope of the audit set out in the audit plan, I think that person may be disappointed should that opportunity arise. On page 26 of the audit report, as I mentioned to Yvonne, as part of a wider public sector audit, we're also required to be alert to the issues of effectiveness and efficiency, waste, and the lack of probity or financial prudence. And again at page 35, when we talked about the definition of materiality, which is much broader than the one used in the private sector. There is transparency. The Auditor General performs, as we concluded, a watchdog role. There is nothing tucked under the carpet or hidden. In fact, we're very transparent. The information is publicly available. That's very much unlike private sector audits, which are much more narrow in focus. So I'm very pleased to support the recommendation and would urge any prospective candidates to read it. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words of wisdom. Just supplementary to that, I agree with my colleague's comments. I guess no one realistically likes the idea of regulation or requiring audits or requiring this, but you just need to think back a few decades, potentially 100 years, at what was going on without these systems in place to protect people, particularly in the public sector. So I commend this report, and I want to publicly appreciate the staff for their time and effort in assisting the auditors going forward. Thank you. Would you like to reply, Mr. Mayor? No. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, Paul. Right. How are my colleagues feeling? We'd like a 5-minute break after this report.
Yeah, might be good.
Yeah.
Caffeine and light.
All right, you can take the next hour and 20 minutes if you would like for your The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly won't hold you to I'll take the report as read, but I just would like to, and listening to the audit comments from everyone, just acknowledge the comprehensive reporting that the staff do to bring this report together, and also the work they've already been doing, working with audit for the end of the year reporting. So, any questions?
Deputy Mayor.
Just wondering on these some of the reporting here, is there any effect being had on the numbers and what you're receiving from the change in IT systems? Is there, in the changeover there must be is there some irregularities or not?
Well, that's been recorded in some of the results, yes. Yeah. But that had already started last year. They were already working on the new I mean, the IT people had been working alongside staff as well.
Oh, yes, I'm not suggesting there's anything in there that's not, but I'm just interested in the level of, there's some reflections in here of different things, and I just wondered whether some of that is down to the change of IT systems catching up with each other.
Yeah, and there still is work going on in several areas, ESU and some of the utilities and roading staff, to refine some of their measures. And there's ESU have mentioned that there's particular fields that aren't there, so they're not closing off some of their responses in time. So as has been reported, we have actually achieved the result, but until we can prove that in the system. So yeah, there's still work going on in that area.
Councillor Reid.
Thanks for the report. And just following on from the previous question, the lack of data means we get an automatic fail. And I don't know if you're able to answer it, but what was the cause of the failure to capture that data? And has that been addressed?
Is there a particular measure you're...
Sorry, yes, page 100, the drinking water standards and compliance. Mandeville scale data loss, unable to demonstrate compliance without data.
I'm not 100% sure, but we'll get the answer on that one. I think it was a power outage which disrupted the calibrated information, but we'll get that information. I did it, get it to you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I have one, just slightly controversial because no one likes chlorine in water. But an annual target of less than 5, is that scaled for a council's operation, or is that mandatory across all of New Zealand?
That's one of the mandatory measures.
In terms of the number of them, or do they scale it for bigger populations?
No, that is the measure, yeah.
Okay. So I could probably hand on heart say that Auckland probably didn't pass that one with under 5 complaints over a year.
So that's based on 1,000 connections to the system.
Right.
So that's
so it does.
where,
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. All right. Has there been a decrease in complaints about chlorine in the water after its introduction?
No, an increase in, yes, we can tell that through the annual plan. I think we had 25 people that actually, wanted to record their submission points against the fact that we are including chlorine in the water.
Okay. They're just not using the complaints mechanism through service requests or anything like that.
I think we are still getting a number of complaints through that measure, that option as well. But yeah, it was just interesting in the annual plan presentation, wasn't it?
No, that's all right. I did read those submissions. I was just interested that.
Can I just clarify the question? I think what you meant is since we introduced chlorine,
yes,
are the complaints reducing over time?
Yeah.
Obviously, once you chlorinate, you get a lot of complaints, and then as the system settles down and you get less odours and so forth, have the complaints reduced? I'm not sure. That's a good question. You try and do you know what the answer is yet?
Well, I think that the taste, because it's broken down into odour and taste, I think that still remains fairly consistent. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. Councillor Reason.
Just following on from that discussion, are those 5 complaints one of the mandatory indicators? Because I find it rather ironic that we were sort of, with one of our supplies, a finalist in the good tasting water mechanism, yet we've got a fail here. 5 seems a relatively small and hard standard to actually pass.
But there's sort of 6 sub-measures to that particular measure of the water quality. There's the taste, the odour, so there's, it's a lot goes into that one measure.
Jeff and then
It's interesting. I think we've been in that competition 3 times. The first time we used Kaipoi water, which is, I think, is pretty pristine, and then the second time Rangiora sample, and this last time we used a cust sample. So I'm not sure if that means the cust water is better tasting or better quality, but it certainly performed better in the competition.
Rangiora water comes from Kaipoi.
Bring it from cust.
On page 88, it's got complaints received about drinking water, 45 complaints as follows. At the bottom, council response nil. Does that mean we haven't responded to
No, so that's complaints about council responding to, because we say there's 6 sub-measures
So,
there,
yeah,
one
those
of them
comments.
is our response to the measures.
Councillor Fulton?
I think I might leave my question because it's about the functionality of our UV treatment water systems. I think it's more a utilities question rather than.
Thank you very much. Any further questions to the report? Go ahead and move in. This one,
Just to thank Elaine for the work that goes into preparing this. It's quite a substantial piece of work. But just right across the organisation, thanks for what you do, Elaine, for all the work. And I know Sylvia's behind and there with the work with the annual plan, getting all our submissions loaded for our consideration. There's a substantial amount that you do, and appreciate your attention to detail and how you manage that process for us. But this year, it's really important that we have those measures so that we can keep a track. So we appreciate the role that you perform, and I know broadly supported with others with getting that information to us. So thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor. Any further speakers? There appear to be nothing to reply to, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not going to respond to that.
I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as foreshadowed before, we're just going to break for approximately 5 minutes.
Can we have 10 minutes?
All day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll take the report as read. And just to note, for the period under review, we received 82 official requests for information and we responded to 66. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are.
Are there any questions of the report? Moving on. Deputy Mayor to move. We have a seconder. Councillor Fulton. Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to thank you for the table, Chair, that's on page 33. Just really interesting in that table that we are no different to most councils of our size. In fact, can I suggest that we've been punching well below our weight in past years, given that this is a rise and you know, a huge rise in what we have been having, and I think that we have actually we've actually come up to, if you like, the level of everybody else. While we have seen this as an imposition for some time now, when you actually look at that table on that page, whatever I said it was, we are not an anomaly to anybody else. We are very much in the same stakes. So this is clearly the new norm. And look, I thank you for the attention and that you've given this. Accept the results, and how can we not?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Fulton.
I'm happy to endorse this. Yeah, as usual, it's a very comprehensive set of figures. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor William.
I look at the table there and I see what Tasman's getting and I think, wow, we're lucky.
Yeah, that thought did cross my mind. All right, there appear to be no further speakers. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to 5.5, Capital Works, March quarterly report. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is our normal quarterly report. Here we are for March. It is later than we otherwise would have liked for this time of the year. But you may recall there were 2 or 3 holidays around the time that actually this information was coming together. So in agreement with Nicole, we actually missed a particular month that we would have rather had and brought it to this month here. The information in here, I think you will note, is lower than you would see as ideal. Across the board, I won't go through all of the numbers in here, there's an awful lot of numbers, but you will see we are lower than we would have liked to have been. For a number of our areas, it's probably there or thereabouts, a little bit low than what we'd like, sort of in the 70 to 75% rather than the 80 to 85 to 90%, which we would be aiming for. And in here, there is a range of reasons given for those. The exception, the 2 exceptions probably are especially solid waste, which I think we're all aware of in terms of a lot of works is on hold there as we get our way through the South Recovery Park works. Earthquake recovery is an interesting one, and you can see on the little table at the top. You may recall we have a fairly, I suppose, harsh self-reporting regime whereby if we've spent $900,000 of a project but it's not complete, we don't declare the $100,000 as being delayed, we declare the $1 million as being delayed. And so you'll see there that the predicted spend is 74%, whereas the predicted spend of projects complete is 53% for earthquake recovery, quite clearly signalling that a number of those have been largely completed, but they just haven't got across the line. And so that is, I think both earthquake recovery and solid waste for 2 or 3 years now have been in that state and will be of no surprise to you. Probably the one that is the exception here is the recreation budget, and in particular I think Chris and Grant are here to talk through both what has happened this year that has led to that, and also, more importantly, I think from your point of view, what they're doing about it in terms of moving forward. So without further ado, I think I'll probably hand over to Chris for a brief summary, and then we'll be open to questions.
Thanks, John. I'll try and be brief. We've provided a little bit of additional context in the report to reflect the fact that the percentage of completion is relatively low compared to where we would have liked to have been, but relatively low compared to other previous years as well. Some of the sort of compounding factors include the slowdown in development. We have an annualised figure which is calculated on the percentage of land that we think we're going to need to buy to meet the needs of the growing population. That is partly subject to when developers will actually develop land and hand it over to us. So in some years it's actually over budget, where we get 3 or 4 neighbourhood reserves that come to us, and in other years it's under budget. If you look at a 5 or even a 10-year assessment of that budget, it's actually relatively good in terms of being on track. Because of a slowdown, we haven't seen those neighbourhood reserves come to us for us to purchase, but we're expecting that we'll get a lot of those next year, so the money will remain in there for next year. The other ones which are causing the biggest impact, because it's based on a financial percentage of delivery, are those land purchase ones, primarily for Pegasus and Ravenswood. So the Pegasus land purchase, I think, was, well, it's around about $1 million. We're so close, we can literally taste that one. They are getting main power to undertake some work that they need to do to get services to the site to complete the subdivision, and then we can actually pay for the land. As you know, we've actually gone out with an expressions of interest for the building of the Pegasus Community Centre, so that's well on track. Ravenswood, as you know, is also going through a process at the moment. The combined amount of that is around $8.4 million, which is roughly half of the program. So what we've done to try and speed up some of the other little ones, we did go through a process of restructuring the Green Space team last year to provide more of a focus on that capital delivery. Duncan Roxburgh is now the manager of a strategic and special projects team, which focuses on delivery of more of that vertical infrastructure based projects as opposed to some of the civil stuff which PDU specialise in. His job is not only to deliver projects, but it's also to make sure that he's creating a program which can then rely on the likes of PDU, the likes of external consultants, and the internal resource that he has in his team and Grant's team to deliver those projects. One of the challenges is always who's going to deliver the project when everyone's got lots of projects to deliver. So getting that program right at the start of the year to make sure we utilise all of the resources we have actually goes a long way towards getting that program done. Additionally, you'll note, not in this report, but it might be in this report, that we've pushed a number of next year's projects out a little bit further, and next year we don't have a lot of projects coming on board. So next year will be a year that we can focus on the carryovers we've got this year, with not a lot of large-scale replacement projects due next year as well. I'm happy to take any questions on that part of the report.
Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, you noted the making provisions, particularly in our growth areas, for new parks and reserves. I'm always interested when seeing how differently we build and shape our playgrounds, etc. Do we have a template that we sort of impose from one community to another, sort of a base standard? And because some seem to sort of get more bells and whistles. I'm not sort of, not trying to pit one community against another, but yeah. So how do we decide as to what level of service and playground facilities we get, and how do we budget for it?
So we have a levels of service document, a parks categories and levels of service document. One specifically for which relates to playgrounds and other assets that you would put in a park based on the type of park. So if I go back, we have lots of we have catchment areas. So if the park is going to serve a lot of people, then you would expect that it would have more resources and more assets in it. And then we have basically a list of different types of assets that we would have in different parks. It only goes that far though, because every development is different. Every developer wants to have assets which are going to be unique for that community. You don't want to have a cookie cutter approach because you want to have options in different places for different people to be able to undertake different types of recreation. We have some standards which are the same around universal design, making sure we have accessibility standards right, etc. So we have a baseline level of service, and then we work with our landscape architects, our developers, our community boards, and our community to then make sure that we actually, design something specific. We do have budget provision, which is how that neighbourhood land purchase, and then we have a neighbourhood land development budget is established, and that's based on roughly one new playground per year in the district, and we've got a set amount of money, around $400,000 for the development of that playground. That's an annualised figure over the long-term plan, because obviously some of them are going to be people parks and quite small, and some might be a little bit bigger. We do also have different ways of delivering new ones. Sometimes we have a private developer agreement where the developer isn't paying development contributions, but they're required to install the playground, and we work really closely with the developers and our levels of service to make sure that we come up with a design that's suitable for the community.
So that private developer agreement could have quite a sway in the look and content of the playground equipment, and so, and there could be a standard that they wish to have for their development.
There are instances where developers have come to us and we've said, this is our vanilla standard, you've got to achieve that standard, and they've come and said, well, can we add additional capital, and can we actually make it slightly higher level of service within our development? And we have a negotiation with them around that. If it's too high, then obviously we've got to replace it and maintain it for the life of that asset, and that's going to be an issue for us. As long as it's not increasing that maintenance or replacement significantly, then we've worked with them to get something which is good for the community.
Right, so that's a one-time opportunity to lift the standard potentially.
Yeah. If the developer's paying for it, potentially yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Kent. I was going to follow on from that. As we get older within this district, are we looking wider to, instead of just playing or playgrounds and that sort of thing, are we looking at providing facilities for our ageing population to, say, have a small hall or a recreation hall that they can use for meetings and that sort of stuff, as opposed to always the same playgrounds or the same sort of the current model? Is that something that you would consider?
It's something that we already do consider. So we have a couple of strategies which assess the trends in population demographics and also what we would then look to provide to meet that need. I think it's important to note that as our population, as a percentage is getting older, the number of younger people we have in our community is increasing as well. So we need to continue to provide for that younger population, but also make sure that we're meeting the needs of the older population. We have a playground strategy, or it's probably more a playground plan, which talks about things like universal design. So in those playground spaces, making sure that we actually have things like some simple things, so seats with chairs on them, so older people can actually use those seats. When we did that plan, we went out and spoke to the community, and we had a lot of the older generation saying, we don't want you to stop investing in our playgrounds because we get more we benefit from taking our grandchildren to those playgrounds, and we really enjoy the opportunity to do that. Then we also have a network, community facilities network plan. So that looks at our community facilities, where we have them, where we should be building them, what their function and purpose is, what the trends are, and that identifies a number of community facility projects in both new areas and replacement of existing facilities to meet that demand as well.
Are we keeping up with the demand in terms of the growth with regard to providing the facilities, like sort of the small halls or even the larger community halls?
I'd say playgrounds, yes, absolutely, we are when it comes to new developments. Community facilities is a little bit more challenging because of the cost involved in building them. They are a very expensive asset to build, and we also have to make sure that when we look at providing those, we look at all the other opportunities for people to use non-council assets like the Presbyterian Church across the road, assets like that which are getting built. But we have, Sefton, Southbrook, these are all community facilities which are used at the moment by our older population for a number of different uses. but they're not fit for purpose, and they do need to be upgraded. And we've got that in our program, but that is a real challenge. I mean, I can name more, as you know. We've got Pegasus, we've got the Ravenwood, Northwood End, Ravenswood in year 11 of the long-term plan. We've got upgrades to Dudley Pavilion to make sure that that's actually utilised and used properly. You know, there's a long list, but they are one of our more expensive assets to build, so it is a challenge.
All right, thank you, Chris.
That's the full.
A little bit of a tail end to my first question, but I'll go there anyway. So just following that, we seem to have quite a focus on owning the buildings, community facility. Has there been consideration to private sector owning and management agreements with existing facilities, or or new builds in subdivision? You just gave an example of playgrounds. Yeah, we're very focused on owning our own buildings when we build halls, and
We've
leasing arrangement.
Yeah, no, an example would be the Southbrook community central of the Southbrook Sports Club building. When we came back to council with the feasibility study that was done, they looked at the ownership and governance structure of that building long term, and what the recommendation was from the experts that looked into that. It's really challenging in today's market, and more challenging than it's ever been for volunteer groups or private charitable groups to own and operate their own buildings, and that's because of the increase in cost and compliance around owning a building, insuring a building, paying for the power of a building, and that's meant that we're in a situation where a lot of these buildings, which historically may have been built by the community and operated by the community, are getting handed back around the country to councils to look after, and for everyone in the community through their rates to chip in to be able to keep them up to that standard which is required by law. So there are real challenges around that, but we should always look for opportunities where we can have other people successfully look after their own buildings, and there are some examples where that is successful. You know, the likes of Mandeville Sports Club, they own their own building, they are able to get access to external grants to look after their building that sometimes the council can't. So we absolutely need to look at all models, but it is getting more challenging in the market for private ownership of those facilities. And you'll note that with the likes of, I think it's the Eaton Hall, not the West Eaton, but the East Eaton Hall. You know, they're really struggling to find the funding to be able to continue to own and maintain that. Sefton is another example, and so is South.
I suppose the question was geared at developer propositions for new builds and new subdivisions, and whether the developer.
The developers they are always the first to come to us and say, absolutely, we've got a deal for you. They do want to build us buildings on their land and own them forever and have us lease those buildings. If you look at a whole of life cost of those buildings, in my experience, it's never stacked up. It's always cheaper when we look at that for council to actually own the asset, noting that we own an asset that's got a 50-year lifespan, but generally they last a lot longer than that when we talk about community facilities. The lease cost ongoing forever ends up in the end being more expensive for the ratepayer of the life of the asset.
I can just add to that as well. Chris has summed that up really well. One of the other sides of that is also the volunteer time and the capacity building that's going on for community groups. Especially those that do own buildings, because that's where a lot of the volunteer time is actually spent, is kind of administering and managing the building itself. There's a number of programs that we're tapping into that Sport Canterbury and others are providing, which actually kind of help people go through what does it look like to be a volunteer now if you own significant or large cost assets. As Chris has kind of alluded to as well, there's also quite an increase in just keeping the doors open. I think you will have seen it through the annual plan this year. We had the Oxford Arts Trust come forward. The actual submission that they put forward is really just operational costs. There's no betterment, renewal or improvements to the building. It's literally just to keep it open. So there's a number of, I guess, risks there in terms of the community kind of owning a building as well. So like Chris says, when somebody comes forward and says, here's an asset that you could potentially own, we've got to address that as well and make sure that there's genuine capacity within the volunteer group that they can look after a building as well. Some of the time it's actually easier or better if they might look at what's already built somewhere else and not
necessarily be immediately on top of where their activity is being played or undertaken, unless of course it is a facility-based thing where they actually need that space to recreate. So there's a number of things there that we're kind of looking at, because it needs to be more sustainable and more cost effective, as well as not driving volunteers to kind of resign because they're burnt out.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? I just want to quickly bring attention to Grant. Thank you very much for being solo tie today. Much appreciated. Interesting to impress. We've got a motion on the table. Do I have a mover? Councillor Fulton, seconded. I'm happy to second that. Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the comprehensive sort of not just report but the explanations to questioning. I think it's a really good point about finding that balance between protecting the commercial interests and sustainability of the council, but also working with community groups who sometimes with the best intentions want to own and operate their own facilities and remain independent of council. I think there's a relationship there that we need to sort of maintain and strengthen. There are definitely cooperative community ownership models that I think are really worth looking at. Just as an example, I saw one in the UK in Yorkshire a few months ago, where on the peri-urban, basically the developer and the community built and maintained and services the park on behalf basically it's a public park, but it's a community ownership model. So I'm sure you investigate these things all the time, but it's great to hear that you're getting consideration to be a bit more flexible, working with the private sector to build and maintain these facilities. So thank you.
Yes, I just want to commend the staff. It's been a challenging year by the looks of this report, and I appreciate all the different cogs in which our organisation operates with. The recurring theme of dependent on others was quite strong through this report, so I just want to commend you for the good work that you're doing, and I have the utmost faith that you're doing your best to deliver to the community what we promise every year, so thank you very much. Right, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we'll quickly zip forward to item number 6, portfolio updates. John. Councillor Ward. We might give her a bit of time to maybe come back. So any questions, understanding orders? There appear to be none. Urgent general business? No. While we wait for Councillor Ward to come back online, I would like to move that we go into public excluded. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor, thank you. All those in favour? Oh, no, we'll hold that.
Sorry, I was listening.
No worries. Portfolio updates.
No, that's fine. I've sent them through to Tia and to Courtney and to you because so that you could forward them through by email, the 3 reports, because in the event that if I speak too much, I cough too much, and so if you'll excuse that, and hopefully, all I want to say really is that the communications report was very informed and is a lot to read. So I've sent that through so that you should all get a copy of that. Obviously, there's a great uptake in our Facebook and our interest in what we're putting out in communications, which is very rewarding and very good. So the communications team are doing an amazing job and have done an amazing job. Our finances are in a great great shape, and our finance team are all up to date with the annual plan and everything like that. We're all ready to go. And you've had a report from the auditor today, and so that's all good. And Marie, you'll see also in her report that they have the dog registrations are underway, and I think that most rating, we're sort of online with what our rates have been paid. Is they've sent out renewal notices for the people who haven't paid, which is quite a similar number to what there normally is. So they're underway with that, and I think that everything is looking very good. And I really have to say that the managers are doing a great job, and we have to be very proud of them. So I hopefully you'll receive all those emails that I sent through yesterday, or the full report.
Thank you very much, John. Any questions of the portfolio update? Councillor Fulton?
One was just really through you, Mr. Chair and Councillor Ward, sort of an update on some time ago we were asked to consider, well, we were told that there had been major changes to our website and the search engine functionality. And it's now a major feature of the word search on the website. Can we have a report back in subsequent meetings as to how that is working for our? I think that's probably in your field because it used to be very specific sort of tabs. And now you go to the top and put a word in and sort of hope for the best. Well, perhaps not the best way to describe it, but it's apparently our search engine was going to do all the hard work looking for information. I get a lot of feedback, people saying, so where do you find it? In district plans.
So fine.
So can we have a review of how that works, you know, the functionality of that website based on search engine and keywords, etc.
I think you'll find there's a very comprehensive report, and everything is covered off in Alistair's report, which is very long and very everything is there. All the percentages, everything's there for everything. So hopefully that answer will be in there for you, Councillor.
Chief.
I know we'll bring back something to a workshop.
It was a major system overhaul, wasn't it? So,
and you want some stats as well?
Yes, some stats as to people, and some sort of qualitative data. Are people telling us that they can't find information, and then, you know, how do we measure that? Or are people just sort of basically walking away from their screens and going, "It's not working for me"? You know, it'd be nice to know how it's working.
That's a current request. We'll get some information back about how we are managing performance of that and what it's looking like. And the search engine and whatever's going on there. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Ward.
Okay.
I'll make sure those emails are circulated if they haven't already been. Right.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor, you're happy to second still? Yeah. Okay. All right. Going into publicly excluded, moving myself, seconding Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried.